In the last section, we installed Materialize as an NPM module and hooked it up to our project through Webpack. Now, it's kind of subtle when you look at it in the browser, but if you look very closely, the fonts that are used for the div and the H2 right here are now distinctly different than what we had before. So I have a pretty good feeling. I feel like it's likely that the Materialize the Materialize wire up worked correctly. But to make sure that that is really the case, I think that we should continue putting together the header. Once we add on a couple of class names that correctly style the header, we'll then have a really good sense as to whether or not Materialize worked properly. So, time to finish up the initial design of the header. Before we do so, I want to flip back over to the Materialize docs, and we're going to pull up the documentation they have over here on how to create a header-looking component. So in the components section right here, I'll scroll on down until I see navbar. Okay, so this right here is essentially what we want to have. We want to have something that looks like this. So if we essentially use this HTML structure right here, it will give us something that looks like this right here. So let's bring this markup over, and then we'll have a better sense of whether or not everything is working the way we expect. So I'm going to flip back over to my header component. Now I have some notes over here that essentially tell me the structure, but basically we're going to use this structure right here. I'm just not going to be referencing back to this exact stuff as we type this out. So inside the header, and let me pull up my notes, speaking of which. So we're going to replace the existing return statement in here, or the existing div, with a couple other components or a couple other elements. First off, we're going to place a nav. Inside of there, we're going to put a div with a class name of nav-wrapper. And then inside of that div, we're going to place an anchor tag, which is going to serve as the sort of logo to our header. You know, kind of the thing on the big top left that a user can click on to go back to the home page. So we will say, give me an anchor tag. We'll give it the name of our application, which right now we're just using as emaily. I'm going to give the anchor tag a class name of left and brand dash logo. And then as a sibling to the anchor tag right here, so right next to it, we're going to place a UL that has a couple of LIs inside of it. And this UL with LIs are going to form the right-hand elements, or kind of the right-hand buttons on the screen. So I'll put down a UL with a class name of right, and then inside of there, one LI that contains an anchor tag, and we'll give it the text login with Google for right now. Okay, so this is definitely enough to test out inside the browser. Now, as a quick reminder, remember that whenever we are working with React components, we do not pass in CSS classes as the class property. We instead use class name. And that's why you see class name over here, but class over here. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so let's flip back on over to our application. And yep, sure enough, everything was looking pretty darn good. So I've got a logo on the left. It's not actually clickable, so I can't actually go back to the home page just yet. But I definitely have like a highlightable link over here on the right-hand side, which is definitely working the way I expect. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. Now, as we're looking at the header right here, one thing I want to remind you about, and this is going to be relevant throughout the rest of the course as we are working on the front end, remember that whenever I show you content inside the browser, I always run with the screen really zoomed in so that you can very easily see what I'm doing. So you probably see something that looks a little bit more like this right here, right? This is probably what you see. So whenever you see my stuff like looking really large or significantly bigger than yours, it's just because I always run with everything very much zoomed in. Okay, so this is a pretty good place to start. We've got at least a little bit of styling here, and we can see the logo, blah, 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 all that kind of good stuff. So I think that we've got probably enough on the styling, and it's time to focus a little bit more on what the login with Google button does and how we're going to swap out some of the content inside the header whenever the user is actually logged in. So let's continue in the next section and figure out how we're going to approach the internal implementation of the header.